Aaron Ramsey's Oxford United see out pre-season unbeaten with a win against Crawley and against Ipswich. Welcome back to Walking the London Road. Connor, back from his hollybobs in Paris, missed the visit of Ipswich, but as we'll go into in a minute, another decent performance, although as we said last week, the results don't matter a jot. Before we get too far into it, folks, please remember to like, comment and subscribe. Massively helps out in the algorithm. Of course, you can follow us on our individual socials and on the account for the podcast on Twitter and on Spotify. They will all be linked in the description below. Your supporters continue to be absolutely superb, and we really, really appreciate it. Connor, I'm guessing data roaming, you only found out about the final score when you got back to your hotel on Saturday.
No, my missus allowed me to go onto her data, which was absolutely wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Grandchamp, for allowing me to use your business roaming data. That was great. So being in the Parc des Princes and seeing the scores come through, nice little surprises. First of all, seeing Jack Curry score a goal, which is nice, and then seeing Stan Mills score what seemed to be a very England-France goal. Do you know what I mean? From the playoff. But yeah, managed to keep it up to date as much as I could.
Fantastic. So, like we mentioned, Ramsey's Oxford see out pre-season with a 100% record, winning every game by at least 2 goals, and only conceding, I think it was 3 across the 5 matches. Which again, we mentioned last week, we took an hour to say something that probably could have been summed up in 10 seconds. The performances are what matter, not the results. But I think the fact that the players are getting into that flow is only a good thing going to the trip to Leyton Orient in the EFL Cup on Saturday.
Yeah, and that's the thing that we touched on last week, and I think the last few weeks since we've had this embargo, that because we can't bring in any players and no players are going to come in and change the squad dynamic, that Aaron Ramsey's had complete and utter his focus has been completely and utterly on how the squad's going to play, how the first team's going to play, getting an idea of what his first team's going to be. So while it's a massive hindrance, at the same time, as I think Jack Curry even said it in his post-match interview, everyone knows what their role is, and in a way, as disruptive as it is, it's kind of narrowed everybody's focus, which is really good over pre-season.
We mentioned last week that the way that this has been structured was pretty good because you go from 2 National League sides to to 2 League 2 sides and then a Premier League team. A little bit of a caveat, and that obviously Ipswich had a game against Wickham later that day, so it wasn't a fully strength side, but there was still some very expensive footballers in that Ipswich team that, from all reports, didn't really trouble our defence.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, there will still be players in there that will be like in and around their first match in the Premier League, but I don't think that a lot of them did themselves any favours if that was their aim. But Premier League squad is a Premier League squad, but as also last week, it is only pre-season and it's performance more that matters. And I think that there's was there 3 weeks until the Premier League starts, so I think still for them it's more about getting minutes in the legs.
Yeah. And I saw your very funny TikTok on that. Obviously, as soon as Ipswich got beaten by us, then all these rumours started coming out about players wanting to be out of Portman Road. So we will wait and see what their squad looks like going to the Premier League. They might be starting with our old boy Wes Burns on the right hand side. You never know. We'll quickly touch on the Crawley game. 3-1. Goal for Crawley from former Oxford United loanee Malcolm Abue with a very nice free kick. Shame he couldn't do that in yellow. But
the irony.
I know, right? It was always going to happen. But another kind of fairly decent performance from a couple of players. Gapno Donker, again, I think we mentioned it last week, but he's at least got a start on Saturday, hasn't he?
I think he has, yeah. I mean, based off the performances that he's put on over pre-season, he's been, in some ways, I think it'll be fair that for a lot of fans, he's been like the surprise performer over pre-season. I think that we with the embargo, like we knew that it was going to be Harris and Odonka, and I think a lot of us were pretty settled that it was going to be Mark Harris that would be starting week in, week out. And over the past pre-season, it's nice that there's actually a bit of competition, and now we're going in thinking there is a genuine toss-up between the two who's going to start. I still have this niggling feeling in the back of my mind it's still going to be Mark Harris, but I wouldn't be who's starting regularly. But if Gatlin Odonka, say, if Odonka starts in the EFL Cup on Saturday and he grabs a goal, or even, the way he plays is if he's involved heavily in a goal or two, then you could find that he's starting against MK Dons in a week after that.
I mean, we mentioned last week that Gats, he could entirely, go into the Leyton Orient game, not have the best performance, and then find himself on the bench. But I think from Gatlin's point of view, that's probably what he would have hoped for, is to be at least around the squad and not sold or loaned out, because we went into last week the very rocky career of Gatlin O'Donkor at Oxford United so far, and he's put himself in the best possible position. Let's just hope that carries over to the competitive matches. Let's also quickly touch on, we saw a couple more youngsters feature. Aidan Elliott-Wheeler, back from purgatory from 2 seasons of being on several National League loans. Good to see him involved. Harvey Bradley, by all accounts, has looked really good, and Aaron Ramsey has seemed to have a lot of trust in him, and we'll talk about a potential butterfly effect that might have on the squad momentarily. But Ramsey is utilising the youth players to their fullest, and there was mention of James Golding, obviously, because Frankie Kent is out with an ACL, him being fourth choice centre back, and he's played with Mikhail Helik mainly, so that could be an interesting centre half partnership for the campaign.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, Ramsey's hand has been forced in that he's having to use youth players, but at the same time, even if he was able to bring players, you wouldn't know if that was still a heavy focus of his, looking to bring through youth. But I think we mentioned it a few weeks ago that it's because Ramsey's hand has been forced, we've gone back to that identity that not only this generation of Oxford fans, but generations of Oxford fans previously have known, that we've been very, very heavy on bringing through youth players. And I'm just spitballing here, but I wouldn't be surprised if that somewhere along the line that we've had at least one academy player who's played, 5 or so games throughout the season. That's someone who needs to fact check me, but I'm sure that'll be there or thereabouts. So it's nice that we're going back to those roots, albeit we've been forced to.
Obviously, with the exception of Tyler Goodrum, because he's technically counts an academy graduate, but I know what you mean. One of the youth players that isn't already embedded in the first team squad. Also mentions to Leo Snowden, who has got some more minutes under his belt. Moby Sanga not featuring against Ipswich, also involved. So a lot of young new blood around the first team, and like I said, they seem to have impressed so far. Again, we talked about last week the fact that for senior players, this period is less important about kind of showing what they can do, and for than it is for the youth team, where it's kind of put yourself in contention to be involved in the first, especially like you said about the situation we're in with an embargo, with a thin squad, all that kind of stuff. Looking at, obviously, first competitive match on Saturday, from the lineup that started against Ipswich, are you expecting many changes, or?
Not particularly. I think the only real one potentially is O'Donkor starting in place for Mark Harris. And again, I think that's because it's not a league game. If it was a league game, I think that it might be more Harris at starting. I'm just reminding myself of the starting lineup, and if I look there, no, not really. I don't really think that there's going to be many changes. The big one, as we talked about before we got on the pod, would be seeing if De Keersmaker is in that starting 11 or if he's in the squad at all. If he's not in the squad, then I think it would be wise to suggest that maybe that he's on the move.
Yeah. Also, it's worth noting of the senior players, it's quite funny to call this man a senior player, given he's still, I think, under 23. But a lot have been very, very impressed with Jamie McDonnell, the way he's developed on the ball. Because, of course, when we signed him, I think we said in the pod at the time that he was very much an Ali Gorin ball-winning midfielder, wins the ball back and then provides it to Brannigan, to Brian de Keersmacher to then move the ball forward. But McDonald's looked pretty decent with the ball at his feet, and a lot of credit to him for clearly that being an area he and the coaches are working on ahead of the new campaign.
Yeah, and that's what he was brought in for in January. I think that he was brought in as a player that even if we went down into League One, which eventually we did, it would be a player that we can bring on and develop, and at some point in 18 months, 24 months, sell him on for, a nice, healthy, profitable return. And that's why I think so many fans at Nottingham Forest and at Mansfield were saying, what the hell? Why are we letting him be recalled? And Nottingham Forest fans saying, why are we letting him go? Because he's that highly thought of. And over pre-season, I guess we're seeing why he's so highly thought of.
Yeah. So looking at the rest of the midfielders, I think we mentioned this last week about, as things stand, our midfield options are obviously Cameron Brannigan, Jamie McDonnell, Brian de Keersmacher. We've already mentioned that there is a lot of question marks. Aaron Ramsey saying that he wasn't involved against Ipswich because he was helping Ruben Ruskin's family. We'll get onto Ruskin and his situation momentarily. There's obviously also Harvey Bradley, who is newly integrated, Louis Sibley, and then Mr. Will Vaulks, who there has been a bit of speculation this week will be departing OX4. Now, it was stated by Jerome Saylor, Big Sorry Oxford, on the dub this morning that one of the clauses that was in Vaulks' contract basically meant that if a better offer presented itself compared to his relegation wages, that he would be allowed to leave Oxford United for free. Now, the current rumour is that Tranmere Rovers are looking to sign Vaulks. Now, from Vaulks' personal point of view, it makes sense. Obviously, he's from the Liverpool area and Tranmere is around there, so, move back home. He's still got a youngish family, which I think maybe he would be a bit hesitant to move his kids out, change schools and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, like we said, around that area is where he's from, so it would also make sense. Give us your thoughts on the situation surrounding kind of Vaulks at the football club, and then because there's one or two other things I want to touch on with this potential departure.
I think that even if he was, I think that going into this season, whether we were in the Championship or whether in League One, I think that he was going to be a bit part player. I think it'd be one that was more on the fringes, and if he was here, he'd probably be here more for experience and leadership than anything else. A bit like like we've seen recently up in the Premier League with Jordan Henderson going to Chelsea. Like he's there. He's not there for footballing reasons. He's there for experience. And like Will Vaulks, unfortunately, he's had a good career. Let's not speak it ill, which is not what we're doing. But I think that with Will Vaulks, he became more. He had a good first couple games, I think, in an Oxford shirt, and then it went sour for about 3 or 4 months, and he started to pull himself back up. Then he just became the long throwing merchant, and that's kind of not what you want to be known as. You don't want to be a Rory Delap, even though Rory Delap was fucking brilliant at whatever he could do, at whatever he did with his throw-ins. But yeah, and especially if we see the way that Aaron Ramsey's playing and the way that he's going down with a lot of the youth players, and wants to be fast, direct, and front-footed. And I don't think, unfortunately, that's really Will Vaulks is really going to fit into that style of play. In terms of his destination, there's some questions I'd like to ask, because I don't understand in what context if there's a better offer, how Tranmere can be a better offer.
Yeah,
that has to be as you say, either through personal circumstances and that will be closer to home, and that he's getting to that, twilight of his career stage. Maybe he can go and help a local club at a time when they're experiencing difficulty themselves. But if there's a better offer, say in terms of wages or packet or financials, I don't quite understand. I think we don't need to know, but it would just be nice to know if there was a bit of clarity on what that reported better offer or better package would be.
So, a couple of points on, obviously, like you say, I think it will obviously be dependent on Brian de Keersmaker's status at the football club. And I think that would still have an impact. I think it would be not confidence suggests, but it would be a good sign, I think, if Vaulks were to depart, that the club are more confident in keeping Brian de Keersmaker. That being said, personally, I wouldn't like to see Vaulks depart, because we talk about, especially with all the young blood that we're bringing into this side, having a veteran like Will Vaulks around them could only be a good thing. Like you say, he became a bit part player last year, and I think he kind of settled into that to a certain extent. When we've got more of the ball, he could do a bit of the Josh McEachran type thing, with sit just in front of the back four when required and screen, while the rest of the midfield and attackers dominate the ball and look to punish our opposition. So that's on the pitch. Off the pitch, like I say, his just presence of being a veteran, but also we need a good leadership core. And at the minute, obviously Brannigan and Long, we expect to both be here by the end of the window. I'd be astounded if either of them were to depart. Mikael Helik is the big question mark, because we know he's got a 650k release clause in his contract, and there's still interest from Poland, from the Championship. So to lose your vice captain, and I mean, I think we both said last season that Will Vaulks should be vice captain as opposed to Mikael Helik. Although that role could go to Sam Long, I think Vaulks would be a sensational vice captain, and I would be very surprised if the club were to put themselves at risk of losing two major members of the leadership core within a couple of weeks.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, it was said in the dub today in BBC Radio also that, in terms of players outgoing, and touched on Helik, the club need to stand firm on who they're going to let go. And especially, as you say, when it comes to club dynamics, it can't be one rule for one rule for another. Each side needs to abide by their contract. And then, in this current situation, I don't think there's any room for gentleman's agreement or outside discussions. It's going to be very what's said on paper is what's going to happen, and the club are going to, you'd imagine they're going to do everything to make sure that an instance like that won't happen, in allowing for Vaulks to walk away, for Helik to go, unless there is this reported transfer fee that is triggered, or for someone like BDK again for a relegation clause that is triggered, supposedly.
So that's the situation with Will Vaulks. I think we've both made our positions pretty clear on his future. Like we mentioned with the Keersmaker, rumours continue to circulate. He hasn't played in any of the pre-season games, but like you said, the big test will be if he plays against Leyton Orient on Saturday, and we'll kind of break down the Leyton Orient game in a moment. We need to touch on injuries, because the worst possible thing has happened, in that a club that has got an embargo has now got two major injuries. Ruben Ruskin, who went off after a bit of a freak incident against Crawley, is expected, according to Aaron Ramsey, to be out for months, not weeks. And John Jin Woo is out for months with a back problem. He's currently seeing a specialist, and there's no timeline for him to return. So this squad is starting to get thinner and thinner, Connor.
It is. It's not what Aaron Ramsey wants to happen, but it is just typical Oxford United. For some reason or another, there is always a player or two that we go into a season with that has some sort of injury issue or has some injury issue which hasn't been reported or hasn't been picked up on. And with Jim Woo especially, it makes it even more vital that we don't let Stan Mills go for any less than what he's worth. And in terms of Ruskin, see, I'm not particularly. It obviously doesn't help in that we can't bring players in, but I think that we already have
The viewers won't have seen it, but your comment in the chat was along the lines of, "Oh no, what a shame."
Yeah, that was my comment, because I think ahead in the queue of that includes Jack Curry, Greg Lee, even Kieran Brown and Ruben Ruskin. I think that he's fourth in that queue to start in a left back position.
Yeah.
But you know, when we can't bring in players, we need everybody that we can get. So, you know.
And obviously that's the add to Frankie Kent that we've already mentioned. He's obviously done his ACL and is out for the campaign. You mentioned Stan Mills there. Let's quickly touch on the fact that obviously Stan, again, played the majority of the Crawley and Ipswich games. Again, getting more minutes under his boots. There's been a rumour that kind of circulated this morning, reported by a Preston fan page with no significant actual cited source. Basically just repeating what Peter O'Rourke had reported a couple of weeks ago. So we have no more on Stan Mills' potential departure. But there has been the club standing firm on its, as you mentioned earlier, not wanting to lose some of its key assets, which, we'll get into where that came from in a minute. But, as I think we mentioned last week, it's what we asked the club to do.
It is, yeah. It is what we asked the club to do. I said in the chat that it was good to hear, like, direct or, through Oxfox, what Dusan Bogdanovic has had to say. I would still like him to go on either BBC Radio Oxford or go on BBC South Today, whatever it be, and firstly show his face and communicate directly to fans, rather than it come through either club channels or it come through written statements or it come through fan boards or come through charity boards or anything along those lines. I think that we can accept that he is going to be a chairman that is going to be, that is going to be quite distant and will, only communicate when the time is right. But I think that if we had a more personal or a personable connection to him, I think a lot more fans would be a lot more on board, and it didn't have to be as rocky start as it has been.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's touch on where this all came from, and that is that finally Dusan Bogdanovic sat down with Oxvox, the supporters trust, and had a lengthy call with them. If you haven't already, it's all on Oxvox's website, the takeaways from it. But for the most part, like you said when we were discussing this morning in the chat, mostly positive, a little ambiguous on the stadium. BBC Radio Oxford saying that a decision is now expected in October, which is like we're getting
mental.
We're still ages away from getting spades in the ground, but that date for when we need to be out the cast, that hasn't changed a bit.
Mate, 28-29, we're playing at Northampton. I'm not even joking now. I think that a lot of fans are going to have to accept that. I thought that it would be tight even for 2 years.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I think that we're going to be playing at Northampton. We're not going to be playing down the A34 or down the A420. That's the only place. But we're going to have to cross that bridge when we get to it, because that's going to have to be a reality that I think that a lot of fans are going to have to settle with. And that's not through, you have to say, like, at this moment, it's not through the fault of the club, it's through the council and it's through certain groups and certain politicians, P-minded.
I think I've said this before. I slightly disagree in the sense that the club, like there'll be people in the club and around it that know how long it takes to get stuff built in Oxford. And I said at the time, the naivety to think you can get a stadium built in 2 years in Oxford, I thought was a bit pie in the sky.
Yeah, but I agree with you. I've been critical on how quickly or how slowly some of this process has been going, but it's more my issue that I'm talking about is more at this moment when we know that we're inches away from getting spades in the ground,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah,
it's the NIMBYs, it's those lot, it's Friends of Stratfield Break, and it's certain local parish council members that
yeah,
are you know that are putting more hurdles in the way when it's really unnecessary, when it's, the situation's been done and we're now crying wolf.
yeah,
That's my real issue. But like you, I do agree that it has been more drawn out than it needs to be, and there should have been proper due diligence in how this city council operates and the amount of greenbelt land that there is around. And that was really the main sticking point as to why it's taken so long.
some of that French wine that Connor was drinking on over the weekend has finally caught up with him, folks. So, like we said, the rest of the statement is mostly positive. My only critique is on the communication. It's again like, so the specific points of the Oxvox layout is: Dusan suggests that he will act as the main spokesperson, acknowledge current frustration among supporters, and fully appreciate the lack of communication had created a vacuum that was unhealthy and fostered rumours, unease amongst fans. Confirm the club's communication strategy will change. That's the fourth time we've heard that.
Yeah.
Across two different boards. And, he goes on to say, actions will speak louder than words. Just speak to Grant Ferguson. The fact of the matter is, the versions of this board have said that, like we said, 4 times, and it's still not changed a jot.
No. So I think that what we're going to have to do, Sam, is that we're going to have to wait and see. We're going to have to give it 3-4 months. We're going to have to wait until we're in the depths of late autumn, early winter, and see what's going on. Because if we're by some miracle in around the top 6, competing for the top 2, I'm sure there'll be lots of communication then. But if we're around the doldrums of mid-table, or dare I say it, worse, I pray to God not, but around lower, I'm sure that communication will be very, very limited. But all we're going to have to do is wait and see. He said actions speak louder than words. I would have liked him to specify and expand on how communication is going to be run differently. If I'm not mistaken, I think that he said that he wants more open communication, but he also will not be seen as much as as many fans would like him to. I'm paraphrasing there. Yeah, working in the background, but to me that kind of sounds a bit like of a contradiction. But as I said, we're gonna have to wait and see. So I'll hold and reserve judgment until we see those actions that speak louder than words.
100%. So let's cap off by looking at our first competitive game of the campaign, away to Leyton Orient in the EFL Cup. Oxford United go on an adventure to try and win our second major honour. That's not going to happen. So looking at Leyton Orient, obviously this is how we've got an awful lot of history with. Through many, many years, obviously there's a lot of former Oxford United people involved. At Leyton Orient, obviously on the playing side, Idris El Mazouni, we bought and then sold back to Leyton Orient. Scott Mitchell is now in place. I think he's their director of football. I think is his title, Connor.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. And there's a lot of history with like results and stuff. Just looking at Leyton Orient, they've kind of done bits and pieces in terms of extending. Making permanent loan players they had last season. The only permanent signing I can see is bringing in Nathan Baxter from Watford, which he's an experienced goalkeeper. But I think the more important thing for Orient was keeping hold of Ballard.
Yeah, and that's still going to be the main main thing for them. Keeping hold of him. You know, some of the best business that you do isn't necessarily like who you bring in; it's also who you keep a hold of. And I think that also because Dan Ballard, he was one of the standout players in League One last season. I think they put a £5 million price tag on his head, and I think that was more to scare off a lot of Championship clubs, and maybe say like we said last week with Stan Mills and Kurzmacher, Leyton Orient saying, you know, don't take the piss. Like, we know what he's worth, so and he means this much to us. So, yeah. I mean, fair play to them. And if you're talking about other players that have had an, you know, or persons that have had an Oxford United past, Finn Stevens, he's been brought in from St. Pauli, so he's there now. You know, many would have thought that he was quite unlucky in the 2024 playoff final to lose his place to Sam Long, but that proved to be the correct decision. We've also got they've also brought in Nathan Baxter from Watford. Yeah. I'm sure if you remember, he made that horror tackle where he was playing for Bolton. To this day, I still don't know how he didn't get sent off. Also bringing in the likes of Armando Dobra, Josh Koroma as well, albeit on a loan. So they've been doing serious business this transfer window. And I think that they're looking at it thinking that potentially that they have another opportunity, you know, to try and go into the playoffs. But, you know, it's the EFL Cup. For the first game of the season, first competitive game of the season, I think that the EFL put these cup games here. So, you know, it's the first game after pre-season. And I think the emphasis is going to be this isn't a pre-season game. It's the first competitive game, and you're going to want to get your season off to a winning start. So, you know, I understand 100%. Why the EFL done it.
Yeah, and obviously also Sean Clare and Jordan Graham, also formerly of Oxford United. They just seem to target anyone that used to play for us. Obviously, also they brought in Aaron Connolly. I think that was it midway through last season they brought him in. Was it the start of campaign? Obviously, you know, he's been a bit of a pain in the ass. He's been obviously patchy throughout his career, but when his mind's on it, he can be a dangerous forward. So, like you said, you know, first competitive game. This is, like I said, a lot of teams are treating this as one final pre-season game. You know, a high intensity pre-season game, but at the same time, you know, an opportunity to, you know, again, realistically, we're not going to win this trophy at all, because Premier League sides come into it. I think it's second or third round. I can't remember which one. But this is a really good opportunity to, you know, put a marker down against a League One rival, and also gauge where we're both kind of respectively going to be. I said that now we'll probably both end up mid-table and have met the square at NAFL. But like you said, you know, it's a good first game. We don't do predictions around here, but do you think this will be taken to pens?
Yeah, go on then. I'll give a 1-1. 1-1 pens, and then I'll be honest, I only want to go through because of potential of an either Premier League that's not in Europe or a Championship club away day, or away evening in August, and it sounds class. So
or another chance to get scum. So I think we mentioned.
Sam,
go on.
Bit of breaking news. Sam Will Vaulks has left the club. That has been tweeted out by the club, and he has gone to Tranmere Rovers.
Well, that's well. That's in that case, discard the what 15 minutes I think we spent talking about him.
Yep.
That's
so the Oxford United can confirm Will Vaulks has departed the club to join League Two side Tranmere Rovers. Will joined in the summer of 24 and played 88 times, scoring 2 goals. More than just a footballer, he will be remembered also for his impact beyond the pitch. The former Wales international was a pioneer in the community, using his own personal story to establish the award-winning Can We Talk suicide prevention campaign. His legacy at the club includes introducing a life-saving suicide prevention check-in app for staff, delivering accredited suicide prevention training to staff and key supporter groups, and leading workshops across the county for schools, education centres, workplaces, and RAF Bryce Norton. Recognised nationally and internationally, he won awards for his campaigning, including the FIFA Pro Player Voice, and was recently named PFA Community Player of the Year. On behalf of everyone at Oxford United, thank you, Will. We wish you the best with your future, and we will continue to drive your important work forward.
That's like we said, it's very much it's something I mentioned not 20 minutes ago. It's something I didn't want to happen, but it's like you mentioned. It'll be interesting to see if we ever get the finance of this deal, because if the clause was that a better offer would allow him to leave the club. Interesting that Tranmere Rovers is the side that were able to offer that, because I think there's a lot of uncertainty and there's back and forth about I think ownership changes at Tranmere.
Yeah, he's gone there on a 2-year deal, by the way. So whatever's happened there, he's gone closer to home. So fair play to him, and the club's right. I think that the work that he's done off the pitch will be remembered more than what he's done on it, and that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, 100%. So I think we mentioned last week, folks, that we'll be doing our official predictions for the campaign, our revised predictions next week after we review the Leyton Orient game. So drop us your predictions in the comments of this video and also the comments of next week's podcast. But thanks so much for watching this week, folks. Hopefully we won't get any more breaking news after we just finished recording. Although we will also have the away kit to talk about, as a teaser went up for that as well before we started rolling. So it's all going off on Monday evening. Folks, if you haven't already, please remember to like, comment and subscribe. Helps out in the algorithm. Follow us on socials. You can see on screen personally, and also the podcast socials, which will also be linked in the description, as well as the link to the Spotify. Thanks so much, folks, and we'll see you next week.